So hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar. So you think you're ready for Selenium 4. My name is Lindsay Walker. I'm the technical e-learning developer at Sauce Labs, and I'll be the moderator of today's event. It is now my pleasure to introduce our speakers. Simon Stewart is the lead committer for the Selenium project and the creator of the open source web application testing tool WebDriver. Diego Molina is a staff software engineer at Sauce Labs and a Selenium core committer. Titus Fortner is a senior solutions architect at Sauce Labs. He's also a core contributor to the Selenium project and the maintainer of the Ruby bindings. Marcus Merrill is the senior director of technology strategy at Sauce Labs. He contributes to the Selenium project and chairs the Selenium conference organizing committee. Thanks to all of our speakers for our excellent discussion, and I'm going to hand it over to Marcus first.
Hello, I know that everyone came to Selenium 4 webinar so that we could all learn about the bureaucratic structure that it takes to maintain such a project, and we could talk about budgets and protecting the copyright and legal considerations that we all go through. So let's spend an hour on that. Just kidding, it'll be about 4 minutes. So what I wanted to cover just briefly is how the project itself is organized. And I feel like it is everyone's responsibility, even users, so contributors as well as users, to understand that this isn't just a project that happens out of magic. It's entirely a volunteer-led effort taken by the sweat of people on this call, as well as many, many, many other people, to contribute both the code, the knowledge, and as well the protections that such a project would require. Selenium is used by millions and millions of people and processes around the globe. And without some sort of a legal apparatus to protect all of this and keep it straight, then it would potentially devolve into chaos, and there would be a lot of bad things that would muddy the waters and introduce confusion and all sorts of crazy things like that. So I wanted to talk just briefly about how the project is organized, as well as encourage people to volunteer to help out, because this is the kind of stuff that hardly anyone wants to do. Nobody wakes up and says, I'm going to contribute to Selenium. Let's get started with talking to a bunch of lawyers. Doesn't happen. So want to try to ease everyone into it and figure out what we can do, and then turn it over to talk about the technical fun stuff with Titus and Diego and Simon. So the Selenium project is organized into 3 separate groups, committees. One is the project leadership committee. The one is the technical leadership committee, and the third is the software freedom conservancy. Now, none of these things can operate without the other. It's a triangle of responsibilities that sort of keeps checks and balances going, but also each side enables the other to operate better. The people generally involved in the technological leadership committee, as you might assume, don't really seem to have much interest in dealing with some of the legal apparatus. And also, not everyone needs to be. There's a lot more people that need to be involved in the technical part than in the legal and other kinds of apparatus. And so a few of us are kind of straddle both worlds, but for the most part, my contributions to Selenium are in the more around trying to make sure that the budget is protected and that kind of thing. So Software Freedom Conservancy is an open source, it's not volunteer-led, but it's a nonprofit organization that backs many, many different projects. Simon might help me remind me which projects it backs besides the Selenium project, but it's a bunch of people wonderful people who got together a long time ago and decided that there needs to be a legal apparatus in place to protect open source projects from encroachment on their copyrights. And without this work, anyone in the world could claim to have some sort of a Selenium certification program or Selenium, something they could claim to speak in the name of Selenium, when many of them don't. And so this organization helps us by enforcing copyrights and making sure that there is support around the globe for a legal apparatus to make sure that the Selenium brand is protected and that it's all kept safe. They also keep the budget for Selenium, which has some money in the bank to help organize conferences and to hire people occasionally for legal consulting and stuff like that. We wouldn't be able to operate without the Software Freedom Conservancy, and we appreciate everything that they do for us. Now, the Project Leadership Committee is mostly a liaison between the Software Freedom Conservancy and the Technical Leadership Committee. And we operate mostly to support the conference and support any sort of community organizational activities that happen outside of the project itself. And that is a committee made up of 5 people. And we meet regularly to discuss these kinds of things, particularly around the conference. Finally, there's a technical leadership committee, which I believe Simon or Diego could talk about maybe a little bit better than me, because I'm not actually on that. I tend to stick with the bureaucratic stuff, which oddly enough, nobody else seems to want to do.
Yeah, so I think a big part of it, as you mentioned, Marcus, is the Selenium conference. And I'd like to open it up to everybody. What are some of your favorite memories and experiences at the Selenium conference?
I get a lot of joy out of just all the flurry of activity that happens around the call for papers. And one of my very favorite memories of the Selenium conference isn't one particular time period, but a process that was developed in conjunction with a group called White October events planning. And we went to them a long time ago and said that there simply aren't enough women and minorities on the speaker stage to present a conference that resembles the audience that attends a Selenium conference. It's all a bunch of, similarly demographic people like myself. And White October consulted with us in a very, very specific way to design 5 or 6 different things that we could do as a committee to put together a plan. And we've gotten to the point where we now have around 45% of our speakers are women and minorities, and we could probably push that even further because that resembles the audience that we represent at the conference. My favorite memory is taking an abstract idea that Simon and a few of us talked about in 2012 and turning it into action that actually made a huge difference in our ability to represent the entire core demographic of the Selenium project. That's my favorite memory.
Great. Diego, what about you? What's your favorite memory or experience from the conference?
My first conference was in 2017 when I was talking about an open source project I developed. And my best memory is it happened there because just before the talk, I was super nervous and I went out for a coffee and there was a guy standing next to me and that guy was Simon. And I told him that I was very nervous. He gave me some very calming words and he told me that everyone who is inside here and who is actually coming to any talk you're gonna give just wants to see you successful, being successful. So that was super calming. And actually that was my first step into the Selenium team. And here I am. So thank you for the conferences and thank you, Simon.
I gotta say, Diego, you really have become one of those representatives too of helping other people succeed. Titus, what about you? What's your favorite memory or favorite experience?
So many great times at the conferences. I love getting to see all the other contributors. The one thing that stands out to me is one of the first Fix a Bug, Become a Committer workshops in Portland in 2015. And one of the Ruby users came up to me and it's like, hey, I really need this feature. Why don't you add this? And I turned to him and I looked at it and I'm like, why don't you add that? And he's like, oh, yeah, I could totally add that. And he that night wrote the code, made a pull request. Alex was in Russia, so a different time zone, so he had it all pulled into the project by the next day. And it was just making people realize that it's not just like, so often we get, hey, why don't you do this? And it's just like, well, you can help us do that. And it was just one of the things that stuck out to me the most at the conference.
So really bringing people together to get them contributing and not be intimidated by it. And last but not least, and also I want to point out that everybody in the panel is wearing a different Selenium conference t-shirt. So.
Berlin.
Simon, what about you? What are your favorite experiences?
Yeah, like Titus said, there are so many. I think the thing that stands out to me is just the opportunity to meet the community of people who are using Selenium and hearing how they're using it and the things they love about it. And I'll be honest, the things they hate about it, because the places where people go like, oh, I don't like this very much. It's a real opportunity for us to improve things and find out where the rough edges are in people's lives. But I think for me, my favorite moment was the very first conference we had a workshop day beforehand. And we thought there was going to be like 15, 20 people there. And Jason Huggins and I had breakfast together. And we sort of strolled into like the grand ballroom, which was where this event was going to happen. And it was completely packed. And we both looked at each other and went like, oh, wow, like people actually use this thing. And it really brought it home how popular Selenium was at the time. And still every day when I walk into a Selenium conf and I see how many people there are, it blows my mind.
That sounds like an amazing community, enthusiastic community. Okay, I think we're going to transition a little bit. Up next, Simon is going to tell us a little bit about Selenium 4. Give us an overview of what's happening with this new release.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you. Yes, I put the word finally on this slide because it's taken us a while. The last major 3.x release for Java, at least, was 3.141.59. And we stopped because if we kept on adding digits of pi, I think people were going to get very upset with us. And we thought we'd be done in like maybe a few months, a year or so, at the most, right? And it took us significantly longer than that. Between the release of 3.0 and 4.0, there have been exactly 5 years, which is an astonishing amount of time. During the life cycle of between 3.141.59 and Selenium 4, we've had slightly over 4,400 commits. So there's been a lot of activity and a lot of action. And I think there's two really interesting things that this shows me. The first one was just how stable the last versions of Selenium 3 were. To have survived 5 years without needing a massive bug fix release or someone panicking is a heck of an achievement. And it makes me feel like really happy that we have managed to get to 4.0, and we're trying to keep this promise of it being a drop-in replacement for 3.x. So hopefully you'll see that same sort of level of stability and reliability that you've experienced for so long with 3.x with 4.x. And then the other thing that makes me really happy about it is we've added so many new features. So not only do you have all the tried and tested stuff, but you've got loads of really nice things that are coming into your plate that will make your testing easier and simpler and hopefully better. And fingers crossed, that's what's happening. And I know that Titus and Diego are going to be talking about those later, so I won't steal their thunder. And instead, can we go to the next slide, please?
Yeah, so Marcus mentioned you're going to tell us a little bit more about the leadership in the TLC.
Yeah, so the Technical Leadership Committee, the TLC, are basically the owners of the language bindings and key technical people on the project. And the people are Alexei, Jim, Titus, Diego, David Burns, and myself. So it's a relatively small group of people. And we all hang out on the Selenium TLC channel on Slack. And the way that we decide where the project is going is basically somebody going, I think it would be a good idea if we did this. And that person doesn't actually need to be on the TLC. It could be anyone in the Selenium community, but we just need to hear them. And we then take carefully listen to what people are saying and what they want to do. And we discuss amongst ourselves, and then we go and implement it. Certainly that's the sort of the idea behind what we do. But quite often it's going to be an individual pointing the direction, going, we should go in this direction. And Diego quite often tells the story about how I said, we should probably rewrite the Selenium server. And then we did it. And that wasn't a terribly popular choice when we started. I think it was the right one long term, but it is one of the reasons why this has taken so long. Now, the other reason why I have project leadership on here is because I've been leading the Selenium project since just after Selenium 1.03 or something was released. It's been a long, long time. I started WebDriver, which we merged into Selenium in 2007. So it's been about 14 years. And this is going to be my last major release. So after this, I'm going to help just make sure we stabilize things, and I'm going to be stepping away. And we're going to see the TLC and the PLC sort of take more ownership of the project in setting its direction. So I think that's going to be a really exciting time, and I'm kind of interested to see what's going to happen. Next slide, please.
Oh, that's great. Can you tell us a little bit about WebDriver BiDi, or the bi-directional functionality?
Sure. So obviously web testing doesn't happen in a vacuum. There are other toolkits out there that people are familiar with. And Playwright and Puppeteer are two of the popular ones that are out there. Now, those are based on a thing called the Chrome debugging protocol. And the problem with the Chrome debugging, or Chrome DevTools protocol as well, is what it's known as. The problem with that is it's tied to a particular version of a particular browser. And that isn't terribly portable. And so what we're doing is we're working with the W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium, to standardize something that looks a little bit like the CDP in WebDriver BiDi. And the major difference between that is it's got vendor buy-in. So all the people making browsers, not just Google, but also Mozilla, Microsoft, Apple, Samsung, anyone who owns a browser can be involved with that process. And hopefully we're going to end up with a stable API that can be implemented by every browser and used wherever you find a web browser. So WebDriver BiDi is coming, but there's one problem, and that's that standards take a really long time to write. So if we just go on to the next slide. While we're waiting, we're going to take advantage of the Chrome debugging protocol, the CDP, in order to offer some of the new capabilities that people expect and want from a browser automation framework. So some of the stuff that we've added, like network interception and authentication, rely on the CDP in order to work. Over time, as WebDriver BiDi becomes available, we will be flipping implementations to use that as much as possible. But for now, some of the features are limited to browsers that implement the CDP, and that's why.
Yeah, that sounds great. And Simon has mentioned a couple times how much feedback is important to him. So I want to encourage everybody to keep dropping questions in the Q&A so we're ready.
Yes, please.
At the end. All right, up next, Titus. Titus has done a lot of work with bindings and the new functionality of Selenium. So tell us about that.
Sure, yeah. So I have identified 10 features in Selenium 4 that weren't available in Selenium 3 that work on Sauce Labs. And in the process of putting examples together in Java and Ruby and Python and C#, I found a lot of little differences between how the different bindings in Selenium were implementing things. So I ended up, like, Simon did a lot of the work in Java, but I'm just like, hey, I really need this functionality. Can you, this is supposed to work like this, but it doesn't seem to be doing what it needs to. And so I had to fix a number of little things in there and kind of just bring all of the functionality. So the first 6 on this list, and actually I'm going to put a link in the chat to the tweet that I made that goes through each of these 10 things with links to the code examples that I created. And so some of these are features that work in all browsers, a part of the W3C specification. That's the new relative locators, the being able to open a new tab, being able to print the page. And all of those things are new endpoints defined in the W3C that all of the browsers are implementing. Element attributes and properties, this probably isn't a huge thing, but it's really interesting to me to see, like, I wasn't super familiar with what is an element property, what is an element attribute, why are they different? And anyway, so it was kind of fun documenting this is returning a Boolean value, and this changes and this one doesn't. And so I found that really interesting. And again, Microsoft Edge, the Chromium implementation did not exist when we released 3.14159. And so we now have options capabilities that do all of that. And then the last 4 here are browser specific. And this is one of the things I was talking about with what Simon helped with and some of the other core contributors to Selenium. Essentially, you're able to implement a lot of these things very easily in the driver locally. But when you're using a remote WebDriver on Sauce Labs, for instance, you're not able to use Firefox specific functionality or Chrome specific functionality. And in Java, this is done with an augmenter. And I looked for tutorials online about the augmenter, and I think I saw one reference to it and no tutorial. So I'm looking forward to actually making some tutorials and talking about a little bit more here coming up, but examples of everything using the augmenter to get these local browser functionality useful on the remote WebDriver in Java is going to be really interesting. Yes, it's great. And I'm also looking forward to putting some code examples around the remote WebDriver builder, because the remote WebDriver builder gives you that functionality for free. And it also does some other interesting things that will be useful specifically for Sauce Labs tests. So anyway, some really interesting things that can be done now that are browser specific that couldn't did not work in Selenium 3. And so I'm excited about all of that. Really enjoyed writing the examples for everything. And I'm looking forward to getting everything documented in the Selenium documentation as well.
Yeah, You've done a lot of work to showcase what Selenium can do for everyone. And we'll be providing follow-up resources in the email as well for everybody. Let's see. Which one's your favorite, Titus? Which one was the most fun to implement?
The fun part of this was actually the .NET implementation, because it doesn't have an augmenter equivalent, but there is a way to define the endpoints yourself and then use them. And so yeah, the Firefox add-on tests are very complicated in .NET. So it's just kind of fun digging into I'm not a C# expert, but it was kind of fun digging into that. I think the most interesting thing to me was figuring out the difference between attributes and properties and kind of digging through what those are. But maybe not as useful to our users, but that was kind of interesting to me.
Great. Thanks for all your work. Up next is Diego, and Diego has done a lot of work with the Selenium grid. So I'm going to let you take it away and start explaining that, because you're very good at it.
Thank you. Yeah, as you can see, we are like broadly talking about what is new here. And one of the things that is really good to talk about is that we have a new grid, and it has written from scratch. As you can see, like it was like a blank canvas that we could start like making things correctly, making things much better than the previous one. And this doesn't mean that the previous one was a bad grid, but it was really hard to understand and it was complicated to maintain. So it was so sophisticated that you needed to spend a lot of time with the code. So that's why Simon had the idea to do it, to do a new grid. And actually I was against that idea, but thanks to TLC, to the discussions, the pros and the cons, the best idea won. And then we have a new grid. So let me show you how that works in the next slide. People are used to the standalone and the hub and node modes, and those things still work. You might need to switch a bit the arguments that you use when you start the server, but overall it works in a very similar way. The node registers to the hub and so on. There's a little difference in the architecture, but you can rest calmly that those two modes still work in the same way. If we move to the next slide, I can show more in detail all the different elements of the new grid. You can think about that we took the hub that we had in grid 3 and we broke it into pieces with two main objectives. One would be to have a more maintainable code, so more separation of concerns. And this will allow us to have a more maintainable, more sustainable code base. But in addition to that, this allows us to scale the grid more properly, because then you can assign each component a good amount of memory, a good amount of CPU, and then they can perform much better. To explain a bit better how all these components relate to each other, we can move to the next slide. Let's talk about the node registration. In the past, a node was registering by sending a request to the hub. In this case, what we're doing, we are relying on some new component called the event bus. So some of the communication that is happening internal in the grid is done through a bus. And in this case, when a node starts, it sends a bus event that is forward, or it's listened by the distributor. The distributor is the one in charge of having all the nodes that are registered and basically finding nodes when a new session comes. So the distributor listens to that event, that there is a new node, and then it basically asks the node, like double checks that it's actually a node, that it exists and it's not some impersonation from a different machine, and then it registers the node. If we move to the next slide, I can show you how a new session works. Imagine you have your laptop, you have your grid deployed, and then you send your request that you want to start a new session. The router will see that you want a new session and therefore will put that request in the queue. And while it sits in the queue, the distributor will be querying the queue, asking for new sessions. Then the distributor in the meantime will start to find which node is able to run your session. And when it finds one, it creates a session, and then it tells the session map, you know, this session that was just started, it's going to be running on this node. So it will keep the relationship between the session ID and the node where it's running. And why is this important? We can see it in the next slide. When the session has started, the next command will be probably, I don't know, loading a URL or maybe maximizing the browser. And then what will happen there is that the router will see, oh, this is a command for a session that already exists. Then it will ask the session map, do you know where this session ID is running? The session map will say, will respond, this is the node where you have to forward the request. And that's why it's called a router. It just forwards information to the appropriate component. So in this case, this grid is way smarter than the previous one because the traffic is only directed to the component that actually needs to receive the traffic, making it a bit smarter, making it a bit more lightweight, and hopefully more easier to scale up. On the next slide, I have a little demo where you can see how the UI looks like. It's a complete new UI where you can see your sessions running. And if you're using the Docker flavor of this grid, you can see the live sessions running by going to the live view. And it's super useful to do local testing, to deploy it in the cloud, and to scale up your tests with Selenium 4.
Why was the Selenium grid written from scratch?
Well, yeah, to reiterate that, I developed an open source project called Selenium that was using Grid 3, and I was very familiar with it. But thinking in doing a small retrospective about that, I needed around maybe 1.5 years to get familiar with the code and actually being able to develop this open source project in a proper way. And then we realized it together in the TLC with Simon, with David, with all of them. We realized that this is really hard to maintain. So there was the idea of developing a new grid and starting from scratch to plan things properly, but keeping all the learnings we had from Grid 3. So that was the main reason to actually use the learnings and use a blank canvas to provide better software for all the community.
And then I noticed that you said there you can see Docker in the live view. Why would one, or why do you use Docker with the Selenium grid?
Well, one of the challenges that Grid has had over time is getting it up and running with the proper browser and browser driver configuration. So if you're a Chrome user, you can see that on every Chrome release, there is a new Chrome driver. So sometimes you want to run your test and you have the wrong Chrome driver there. So the thing is that when you use these Docker images, everything is completely packed, it's ready to be used, and basically you have a grid working out of the box. And with that, sometimes when people are running a test inside a Docker container, they are missing, the browser popping up and showing how their test looks like. So with this feature that you can actually see how the test is running inside the container, well, it's much better than you can have the same experience as if you were running them on your own laptop.
Great, thanks for all your information about that. Next, we're going to move into a question, Ask Me Anything session. But the first thing I wanted to do is present a question to all the panelists that are here today. And that is, what is the future of Selenium? Diego, why don't you start?
Oh, okay. I was hoping that someone was going to say something, and then I was going to add to that. From my point of view, I think the project needs to start reaching out more to all the projects that depend on Selenium. So, for example, you have lots of frameworks that are built on top of Selenium, and we need to get closer to them so to enhance the core of the community, because it happens very often that users post a GitHub issue asking, I want this functionality, I want this other feature that doesn't really belong to the core of the library, but it fits in a framework. So if there is a core group of frameworks and a group that serves the community, all those type of features can be implemented in different levels where it makes sense. So I think if we get together the whole WebDriver community that is built on top of Selenium, I think we can make a bigger difference and improve testing across the whole community. That I would say that that's where we have to spend more time. And I believe other ones will talk about more technical topics.
Marcus, I'll call you up.
Yeah, I won't be more technical. I would just say stronger governance, stronger project management, and stronger community involvement. To me, that'll be my mission going forward. Now that I'm not really, I haven't written code professionally in like 2 years now, so I feel like the skills are so rusty. I need to help out in other ways. So that will be my focus going forward.
Great. Someone needs to do the nuts and bolts behind the scenes, right?
Yeah.
All right, Titus, what do you see in the future?
Yeah, I fully support both Diego and Marcus's points. I implement. I'm the maintainer for Water, which is a test library built on top of Selenium, and it's very common that people complain about Selenium as something that, like, the whole Selenium ecosystem. And I think Selenium as a project needs to be able to take a little bit more responsibility for the user experience using our product in the ecosystem. As at Sauce Labs, I see a lot of implementations of so Selenium is kind of designed to be the browser automation portion. And the test automation, the test libraries built on top of that. I talk about it as Selenium as a do what I say. But people to write good tests need to be able to have a do what I mean library. And what I found working at Sauce Labs is people are especially poor at writing some of that functionality. And so finding ways to encourage open source projects that make that so everyone doesn't have to reinvent the wheel is going to be super important going forward. Just kind of, I think Simon's talked about like fit and finish for moving forward. And that's something we're going to take on after he leaves the project. So there's that. Another thing is I'm looking, one of the things I noticed working on finishing up Selenium 4 is all of the Selenium bindings. The maintainers kind of implement things in their own bindings without making sure that all of the different languages are supporting that. And so I'm looking forward to kind of a more strict, we're going to all implement, shadow root functionality. And now let's make sure that that's working in all of the languages, and now let's do a minor release, and just kind of making sure that things are equivalent across the board to make sure that everyone in all of the languages are getting a similar experience. With Simon being primarily the Java developer, it's gotten a lot more focused than some of the other languages, and only about half of our users on Sauce Labs use Java. So that's kind of what I'm going to be looking for going forward.
And Simon, as you take a step back, what are some of your hopes and dreams for the Selenium project moving forward?
The thing that I think of is the future of Selenium is really bright. We've spent, with the 4.0 release, we have cleared away a lot of technical debt that we were carrying. We've given ourselves the opportunity to take advantage of sort of underlying technologies, but do that in a way that feels like Selenium, right? Like when you're using the capabilities that we have exposed through CDP, you don't actually know you're using CDP, which is why we're going to be able to switch them over. And instead, it just feels like you're using Selenium. And I think that's a really important thing, right? Because it's a nice, consistent way of modeling the world and thinking about it. So I'm kind of super excited to see what people do with the sort of strong technical foundation that we put in place. The other thing is, like Titus says, and like David Byrne says, if you talk to him as well, it's the fit and finish, right? It's all the things where people go wouldn't it be nice if? I know that a perennial problem is the stale element exception, right? Everyone who's written a Selenium test will at some point have come across one of those and thrown their hands up in disgust. And the support library in Java started off as using the machine code of browser automation, the WebDriver API, here's some interesting things you can do. And we never put together an example of here's how you can do automatic element relocation, right? All the pieces are in place, but we never did it because we were so busy focusing on can we just get this thing to stand upright a little bit more stably? That would be nice. So I think sort of there's a nice area for growth and opportunity that could come along. But really, I think it's going to be up to the TLC and the Selenium community to help figure out what the future of Selenium should be.
Sounds like you really set the stage with a very stable version of this, so people can move forward.
It was a huge team effort. Without Diego and Pooja and Titus and Jim and like everyone who's been involved. Yeah. And Shri, yes. And all the people whose names I'm not mentioning right now. Like there have been so many committers on the project, and without them, we wouldn't be doing it. Like I've done a lot of coding, but so has almost everyone else. And everyone on this call has thrown code at the project.
Thanks to all of our speakers for that excellent discussion, and on top of that, for all the contributors to the Selenium project that have made this come to fruition. So we now have about 20 minutes for Q&As. I'm going to look a little bit to the panel members about some of the questions that people have posed. But let's start with the comment that said, I see that has authentication interface is implemented only in Chromium driver, Chrome Edge. What are the plans to have this in Firefox and Safari browsers? And most importantly, to work against the Selenium grid environment?
I can answer that. We have, if you're using the Java bindings, which I guess you are, given the question, if you use the augmenter, even you will have authentication added if the underlying remote session supports it. So you go to the remote WebDriver builder, and that will give you a WebDriver instance that has authentication added to it. It relies currently on capabilities offered by the CDP, notably the fetch domain of the CDP. And that isn't implemented right now in Firefox, but the minute it is, it should work the way we expect it to. It will come to Safari. I can't speak for Apple, right? I don't know, but Safari doesn't have the CDP. So it will need to be one of the use cases that is covered by WebDriver BiDi. And when WebDriver BiDi is implemented by all the browsers, authentication will become more widely available that way.
Second question, what improvements have been made to allow for improved interaction with the Shadow DOM?
Yeah, I could take that. The Shadow DOM is there. David Burns did a lot of work getting some of that ready for Firefox, but it hasn't been merged into the Firefox code yet. Chrome merged it and then unmerged it, and I think they've merged it again. So I'm expecting the Shadow root stuff to be available in Chrome 95 or Chrome 96. I'm not entirely sure. I haven't tested it yet. It's on my list of things to do to see if it's actually working yet. But we'll get some of that. It's in the W3C now, and so in the specification. So hopefully soon we'll have something that we can show for that.
Great. Next up, this is kind of a request. Marcus, how will Selenium survive the future? Will Selenium survive the future?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think all of us could field this question a bit. I mean, and I think that everyone on the panel would agree with me that in the past, I think we've seen Selenium be a little bit overused, used for things it was not intended for, used for DOM to database testing, but also for as a proxy for API testing and all sorts of stuff. In my opinion, all these other frameworks that I think are in parentheses here around Puppeteer, Cypress, Playwright, Test Cafe, and any other sort of JavaScript-y kind of, or I don't know, API testing framework. To me, these are all ands. I don't see any reason in the world it would be an or. If you go to Cypress's or Puppeteer's documentation, you'll see many, many, many design decisions they made that says, we will never be able to test this. And for those things, most of them, Selenium will be able to test it. I don't see any reason why you would have to choose either or. To me, the best solution would use both. So to me, I think it will survive the future by the fact that it is a web standard. It is a W3C ratified recommendation, and it's a protocol. It's not just a tool. It's not just a thing that we all threw together and did. And as we see these other browser tools take off and encompass a whole new set of features, they have their limitations. Selenium has its limitations. And to me, a proper, mature approach to test automation in the future will adopt an and approach, not an or approach. So anyone else want to take that? Add on?
Yeah, I'll say that Selenium is the only option that is implemented by all of the different browser vendors. Everyone has agreed on this is how things should work, and each of the browser vendors have implemented the way that should be implemented in their specific browser. And Selenium, it takes a while to do everything the right way, and a lot of these other options are taking shortcuts and trying to move fast, and hopefully we can start moving a little faster in some of the minor improvements that we're making and some of the new changes we're making with BiDi and some of these other things. But if you're looking for the most accurate implementation of automating a browser, there are no other options than Selenium.
I think one small point to add as well is a lot of the new tools sit on top of the CDP. And we now also have the ability to hook into the CDP when we need it. I think the difference between what Selenium does and some of the other frameworks is we tend to be use case driven. So you'll notice that instead of exposing like the raw protocol, we've exposed a network interceptor that allows you to handle the case of I'm going to intercept some network traffic, or the authenticator, which allows you to intercept and handle the authentication dialog, so basic and digest authentication, right? So I think what you'll see is a continued growth of support for some of those more common use cases. And as those are found, we're going to feed them into the WebDriver BiDi spec, and that will then become available to all the browsers in a sort of nice platform independent way. I think it's going to be great.
Yeah, that sounds great.
I wanted to add something to that, and I believe it has been good that new frameworks have come out, because so to answer the short answer to the question is Selenium will survive the future and even further, because we listen, we are open to suggestions, and all the changes we are doing to offer BiDi through CDP, for example, is because we see that other frameworks out there offering these type of features, and we see that we don't only see that they're cool. I understand that some people think that this is cool, but in some use cases they offer value for testing, and that's why we are listening. We're open to suggestions, we're open to improve, because we are an open community. This is a project with open governance. Anyone can come and suggest things, work with us, and one of the huge difference between this project and the other frameworks is that there is no company behind us. We're just a group of volunteers. Yes, some of us were paid by a company to work in Selenium, but this doesn't take the nature of the project as being open for anyone. So if you want to come here and offer an alternative to do this in a different way, we're here listening to you, which is completely different of the approach of other projects. So I think that's why Selenium will survive in the future and even further, because we're here listening for you to see what you want to change and what you want to improve.
Selenium has a very strong community foundation. You're working hard to make it a standard and listen to the community and let everybody contribute, which is fantastic. Now, this is the big, we've had a lot of questions. Is Appium compatible with Selenium 4?
I could take that since I've looked at the Java is the main one, not yet. That's the hardest one. Both Python and Ruby have some alpha beta versions that are compatible, and so they'll be able to update here shortly. The .NET implementation, there's a couple people working on getting it. It hasn't had as much love the last few years, but I know that there's something actively in the works. I think actually, Diego, you might be able to speak to the Java status a little bit better.
No, I'm not. I have to dig into the work that is being done in the Java bindings for Appium, but what I was going to mention is that one of the huge queries that has come into both projects actually is to support the Appium server with the Selenium grid, and that was something we added maybe 1.5 months ago. So in some way you can get started with Selenium 4 also supporting Appium. But yeah, what Titus said about the bindings, that's all I have.
All right, the elephant in the room. What is the expected release date for an official stable release past the current release candidate?
So as a Selenium project lead, I'm going to say maybe earlier today on the 13th of October, 2021. We did the 4.0 release this afternoon in British summertime. And in different times for everyone else. But if you go to your favorite package manager for your favorite language, you should be able to get hold of the latest version of Selenium 4.0.0 today, right now. It's available. We shipped it.
So exciting.
I know, it's so exciting. I couldn't believe it.
All right, I'm gonna poke through. I'm gonna pick one that I'm kind of interested in. Is there going to be any support for API testing with Selenium 4?
Yeah, Marcos was going to say something. Go ahead.
Trying to come up with a metaphor. It's like, I don't know. Am I wrong? It's kind of like asking whether or not the dishwasher can clean my car. I mean, it's not an API testing tool. Is that too simplistic or?
I mean, Selenium is designed for the full stack DOM to database. You're interacting with a browser that interacts with the API that goes down to the service layer and manages things on your web application. Definitely you want to use them in concert. Most of my Selenium tests in the past have used API calls to set up and validate data and verifying the UI interactions are correct. But yeah, it's something that is outside the scope of what Selenium is intended to do.
I apologize for being flippant there. I just Selenium is by its nature a robotic browser control framework. Does not
front end, not necessarily API call testing. Does Selenium 4 now offer functionality for the ages-old problem of handling browser authentication pop-ups?
It's handled. We have in Java has authentication interface that you can cast your WebDriver to, and then you can choose how you're going to present your credentials. So you can register global credentials for everyone or specific credentials for specific sites. And similar functionality is available for all of the language bindings.
I know we don't have a whole lot of time to go into this now, but what changes in a configuration or capabilities are needed to implement Selenium 4? What do you need to do to update your code? I know there's a lot of content on this that we can also point people to. The options class or options the options instead of capabilities, that sort of thing.
So the simplest thing to do is to change your dependency from 3 to 4. And if we've done our job right, it'll work. It may run into a problem if you've been using interfaces that have been marked as deprecated or internal or beta. And those were all clearly marked in the last handful of 3.x releases. So you've had a bit of time. We have a guide in the Selenium documentation for how to actually do that migration for those places that are a bit ropey and where it's a little bit rougher. The main thing that you're going to see from instantiating a new browser instance is a move away from desired capabilities towards browser-specific options. Now, those both implement what's known as, in Java at least, the capabilities interface. So once you've got one of those, you can just call set capability, and it will work exactly the way it always used to. But this time you've got a sort of piece of strong typing that goes like, here are the things you could do if you were going to start a Firefox, or here are the things you could do if you're going to start Chrome. So figuring out like the correct incantation to get like a headless instance of Edge is now just a case of calling set headless true on the Edge options rather than trying to figure out like what you need to set. But I know Titus has been on the sharp end of some of this more than I have. So he might have some stuff to add.
If you've already updated to the W3C syntax, which was available at the end of 3, the last release of Selenium 3, it should mostly just work. I know a lot of people haven't done that yet, though. So that's going to require updating to the options class, making sure that you're using a dictionary of Sauce Lab specific things to pass that in under a Sauce options key. But yes, for the most part, there aren't going to be a lot of changes.
All right, here's a fun one. Why should people be excited about this release?
Why should they be excited? It's the first Selenium release out of the box, where the grid supports Docker, where you have access to the CDP and you can do all sorts of interesting things. And it's our first stable release for about 3 years. All of those are reasons to celebrate, in my opinion. And I'm going to hand off to Marcus.
Everything Simon said, and also in my whole career, I feel like I'm in this lifelong battle against tech debt, and this release paid off a whole bunch of tech debt. So I'm super happy about it. I feel like maybe that isn't a good reason for you to run out and be excited about it, but it's a reason that I'm excited to sort of get some of that debt off the books and really make it easier for hopefully for people in the future to start to contribute to it. So everything Simon said plus that.
I can go next. I am very excited because aside of the technical part that we have a good piece of software out there, I'm super proud that all this work happened in the open, that people came, gave feedback. Many bugs were found because people were reporting things. Also because all this process of developing Selenium 4 brought new contributors and new committers to the group. And this is thanks to the open governance we have. So we established it along the technical work we did. We established a lot of work that is setting up the Selenium project to be more stable in the future in terms of participation from different members, openness to accept new members, and all this is all done under a transparent umbrella that is basically our website, our Slack channel, our IRC channel. All the content we have is open. So all this work that is maybe not so visible, but it's extremely important, what was done in parallel to all the technical work. So all this work that is being done is the foundation to have Selenium 4, 5, and 6, and I don't know how many more we want to release out of the box working for you with your collaboration. I think that's what excites me most, that there is a lot of work to do together with the community.
I'm just going to briefly add that one of the biggest changes that we haven't talked about in Selenium 4 that none of you actually care about is that we completely revamped the build process. And so being able to generate all of the artifacts and the server information and all of the DevTools things, all of that is now being run through Bazel, and it should be super straightforward to continue that process. We had some really complicated things in the past. And so that's one of the major pieces of tech debt that's now something that we can expect more small releases more often going forward. And we've got everything in place to make that possible.
All right. Well, I want to say congratulations, guys, and thanks for all your hard work. That's all the time that we have for today's webinars. Thank you so much, Simon, Diego, Titus, and Marcus. And thank you, everybody, for attending. We'll be following up with an email with a recording and more information. On behalf of Sauce Labs and our presenters, thank you for joining us and enjoy the rest of your day. Congrats.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.